So let me show you how I manage randomizing numbers in the next version of Generator. Currently, what you can do is you can have a color and you can have like a random node or a noise. And then if you select them, you can right click and say randomize, and then both of them get randomized. And then also you can pick, for example, which nodes can get randomized in the preferences by unchecking color and number. And number is what I'm going to talk about now. So then if you select more than one, only randoms are randomized and the colors are left alone. And this is really convenient for when you have lots and lots of nodes and then you just want to randomize the seed. So you just select everything, press Shift R, and it works. But I'm going to bring it back because I want to show you something. So sometimes when using Generator, I've needed random numbers, just like an unconnected to anything random number. And also sometimes for testing any random number. So what I added is if you have a number node, you can also randomize. You can press Shift R and randomize, and then if everything is selected, then you can also uncheck all the stuff in the preferences, etc. But the question is, how do you actually randomize a number, right? So you can just randomize it, but just randomizing to 0 to 1, and then you do whatever you want with that normalized range. And here we use slightly different values. And so where this comes up is, let's say you have a number and another number and another numbers, and I want to like interpolate the numbers. And so using this node, you can interpolate through the numbers, like a whole sequence of numbers. And then I want to see the result. Well, if I want to have some random numbers here, before I added the randomizing feature for numbers, I would have to like manually come up with these random numbers. Like, what do I want to see? And this is not, ideal. This is like, I've noticed in using Generator and just in my work when I need a random number, sometimes you just need like a random number, something that's even random to you, for a little bit of creative inspiration or just because you want to test some edge case or something like that. So how do you actually create a random number? Because by default, this has no limits. It's from min safe integer to max safe integer in JavaScript. Yeah, min safe integer to max safe integer. There you go. Well, here's what I did. If you have something like a fill, right? And you have a parameter which is an opacity, which you can plug stuff into. And this goes from 0 to 100. So this has definite limits. So now if you create a number and you plug it into a parameter, and then you randomize it, it'll actually respect the minimum and the maximum of that parameter. So you don't need to worry about what the random number is going to be. You're going to get a reasonable expected number for your normal work process. If you have, let's say, a color and something like a lab, which has channels with negative values, and then you plug this into it, then it'll use these limits now. If you plug a random value into two things, it'll start generating different, just unconnected to anything values, because it doesn't know which values, which limits to take. Like I could take a guess, for example, the lowest limits or the largest limits, but this is a really, really weird thing to guess because everybody's workflow is different. So I'm not going to guess. So if it's connected to one parameter, it respects those limits. If it's connected to nothing, it now has to come up with some kind of reasonable random number because there's no context. Well, you can't just have a random number. You can't go from min safe integer to max safe integer because mostly you're going to get these ginormous numbers which you don't use for anything realistic. Like these are not numbers that figure in your work. So we can limit a range. Let's say generally our random numbers are going to be from minus 1,000 to plus 1,000. But then I figure if you're getting like a conceptually random number, it doesn't make sense to use negative values because negative values don't feel like natural numbers. They're not, you can have a box in Generator that has a negative height, so it goes up instead of down. But that's kind of like a convention that we just kind of like, it's not a real thing. So having negative numbers come out of a random generator is weird. So my sort of average range for the randoms is going to start with 0. What's the max? So we could say, well, opacities are 0 to 100. So let's make it 100. But there's quite a few situations where you need numbers that are bigger than 100. Do we go to 1,000? I mean, that's reasonable because most values you tend to use are going to be under 1,000. In my experience, it's like 500, 600. That's kind of as far as you go typically with numbers. I mean, okay, if you have a wide canvas or wide frame, which is like 2048 or 4,000 pixels or something like that, yeah, then you need larger numbers. So I'm thinking of the number of digits. If I say random number, getting a 3-digit random number is not strange, right? Getting a 2-digit random number is not strange. Getting a 4-digit random number is a little bit more strange, but also sometimes useful. So if I just say I want 0 to 10,000, because 10,000 will give me 4 digits, what happens is that most of them are actually too big. Like these are not the random value. You saw there was just like a few there. So that's a 3-digit number. And sometimes you'll get a 2-digit number, but that's like such a tiny portion of the whole range of 0 to 10,000 that we need to weigh it down. It could be done on a curve, like a cubic curve or maybe a fourth power or something like that, where it's really, really, where it squashes it down. But I thought, why not just do it manually? Because then I can choose what the adjustment is, what the weighting is. So instead of just having a max of 10,000, what I decided to do is to split it. So I have a range from 0 to 50%, which gives you 2-digit numbers. Then another 40% give you 3-digit numbers, and then the last 10% give you 4-digit numbers. And these are the weights that I chose empirically just by testing. So here's what you get. As you start randomizing this number, you will get 2- and 3-digit numbers. And when you're talking about an abstract number in a vacuum, this makes sense. Like, oh look, I'm getting random numbers. And sometimes, very rarely, you will get those 4-digit large numbers. Now, if you want, I mean, you could also say, you could like go crazy and add 100,000 or 1,000,000. But listen, if you're typing a number that's like this, and that's your random number, at this point, you're just mashing fingers on the keyboard, and you can do that anyway, right? In 4 years of developing this plugin, I have actually not run into a case where I need lots of this kind of random number. The random numbers I've tended to need were below 10,000. So that's the range that I chose. So this feels a lot more natural than having an actual random number. So this is a little bit like what the iPod Shuffle did with their Smart Shuffle. And so now if I want a bunch of random numbers, for example, to test this, or if I want something to randomize an opacity, I just press Shift-R. And this seems to work really, really well.